Ever think about what it would be like to live in a world where your perfume could be a weapon?
Sounds a little dangerous.
Well, that's the world we're diving into today. The world of Zoe and Theodora, Byzantine empresses.
Two powerful women, in the 11th century no less.
These sisters ruled during a period of intense power struggles, and their lives were filled with more intrigue than a season of, well, just about any drama you could think of today.
I think what fascinates people about their story is that it gives us this glimpse into a society where women in positions of power were incredibly rare.
Practically unheard of, really. And yet, here are these two sisters, navigating the Byzantine court, holding on to power.
With remarkable skill, I might add.
Absolutely. For this deep dive, we're going to be looking at an episode of the Stuff You Missed in History Class podcast.
Oh, that's a great one. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, it's a really excellent resource. They really did a fantastic job bringing Zoe and Theodora to life. You really get a feel for their personalities, their ambitions, the relationship between them.
And the challenges they face, too.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Especially in a world that wanted to limit their influence at every turn. So to really understand their story, we need to sort of set the stage. Imagine Constantinople, the heart of the Byzantine Empire. It was this bustling city, full of these vibrant marketplaces.
Overflowing with spices and silks.
Right. And these magnificent palaces, overlooking the Bosphorus. But beneath all this beauty, there was this constant undercurrent of intrigue. It was everywhere.
Like a shadow lurking around every corner. You have to remember that the Byzantine Empire was actually the continuation of the Eastern Roman Empire.
Yeah. And it lasted for centuries after Rome itself fell.
Exactly. And by the time Zoe and Theodora came to power, the empire was being ruled by the Macedonian dynasty. A dynasty that had seen better days, I'd say.
Coming to an end, even. The end of a 200-year reign. But wasn't the Macedonian dynasty responsible for a lot of the growth and prosperity of the empire?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they oversaw this golden age for Byzantium. They saw major territorial expansion, a flourishing of the arts, and they even played a crucial role in converting figures like Vladimir the Great to Christianity.
Wow. Talk about a legacy. So Zoe and Theodora really had big shoes to fill. But then on top of that, they were women. In a world that just didn't accept female leaders.
Right. That's what makes their story so compelling. It's this question of how did these women not just survive, but thrive in a time and place that constantly question their right to rule?
A great question. So let's get to know them a little better. We'll start with Zoe, the elder sister. She's often described as this very passionate woman, impulsive.
With a love for perfumes.
And maybe a little too much love even. There were rumors.
About poison.
Exactly. Now, the source doesn't confirm whether she actually used poison or not, but it does raise some suspicions, especially around the death of her first husband, Romanos III.
Very suspicious indeed.
Now, her younger sister, Theodora, she was quite different, more reserved, very sharp-tongued, and she was known to be an excellent observer of the Byzantine court.
You could say she was a shrewd judge of character. A bit more cautious and calculating than her sister.
Yeah, and according to the source, she had a calm disposition, which probably served her well in the midst of all that Byzantine chaos.
You can say that again.
So here we have these two sisters, in this world of power and danger, surrounded by characters who could rival any modern-day drama. Emperors were rising and falling. Alliances were constantly shifting.
Like sand in the desert.
And suspicion, well, suspicion was just hanging in the air, almost as thick as the scent of Zoe's infamous perfumes.
The source really paints a vivid picture of this era. It walks us through all the turmoil and drama and introduces us to the emperors who came and went during Zoe and Theodora's lives.
Speaking of emperors, let's talk about Zoe's husbands. I mean, she had a few, didn't she? And each marriage seems to have added yet another layer of complexity to an already complicated situation.
Oh, yeah. Byzantine politics was one tangled web, that's for sure.
Zoe was married 3 times, and each marriage had a huge impact on the empire. The first one, Romanos III, that was arranged by her father right before he died.
That's right. He wanted to secure the future of the dynasty.
But it doesn't sound like a love match, does it? Plus, there's that whole mystery surrounding his death.
Well, the source suggests that Zoe might have grown a little tired of Romanos. And his death, well, let's just say the circumstances were a little suspicious.
Dying in his bath.
Exactly. It could have been natural causes, of course. But people definitely raised eyebrows. Poisoning, as you know, was pretty common back then.
A convenient way to get rid of a husband you're tired of.
Perhaps.
And then comes Michael IV, Zoe's lover who became her second husband. Talk about a power move. But he wasn't too keen on sharing the power, was he?
He seemed quite suspicious of Zoe. Probably because of those rumors surrounding Romanus' death, so he pretty much confined her to the palace.
Wow. From empress to prisoner in her own home. Talk about a dramatic turn of events. But then, of course, there's her third husband.
Constantine the X, this wealthy aristocrat, known for, let's say, enjoying the finer things in life.
He became emperor when he married Zoe.
Right.
But his reign was full of scandal.
You're talking about his mistress, Sclerina, right?
Yeah, that was a big one. It shocked the entire court. I mean, here's Constantine, married to Zoe, but he's openly flaunting his relationship with this other woman.
The source says he even gave her the title of Augusta, which is second only to the Empress.
And the palace staff. They were calling her Empress, too. That must have made Zoe furious.
Oh, I'm sure it did. But it's interesting to see how Zoe dealt with it. I mean, she always managed to adapt, to maintain some level of power even in these crazy situations.
She was a master of playing the game, wasn't she?
Absolutely. A true survivor. You know what's interesting? When you compare how Zoe dealt with Constantine's infidelity to Theodora's views on marriage and fidelity.
Oh, yeah. Theodora definitely would not have put up with that. Not one bit. But, okay. Putting all the palace drama aside for a second, how did they actually govern? I mean, were they effective rulers?
Yeah, that's where the source really gets insightful. It acknowledges that it would have been very challenging for women to hold positions of power back then. I mean, this was a super patriarchal society. But it also highlights some of the things Zoe and Theodora accomplished.
So they weren't just like sipping wine and plotting against their enemies all day.
Well, maybe a little bit of that too. But they also had to deal with serious stuff. Rebellions, economic crises, all sorts of threats from outside the empire. And, the source actually mentions that both Zoe and Theodora were very popular with the people.
I bet Zoe's reputation for being generous helped with that. Wasn't she known for giving out lavish gifts and stuff?
Oh, yeah, she was famous for it. She just loved spending money from the royal treasury. Although the source does suggest that her generosity might have contributed to some of the economic problems later on.
I guess you can't just keep the money flowing forever.
Right. Exactly.
But what about Theodora during all of this? I mean, was she just sitting back and watching all this drama unfold?
Not at all. Remember, she was sent off to a monastery.
Oh, right.
Maybe out of jealousy or fear, even. But when Michael V tried to banish Zoe, the people of Constantinople revolted. And they demanded that Theodora come back.
They literally pulled her out of the monastery and said, "You're in charge now." Amazing.
Isn't it? That really shows you just how much the people loved these two sisters. And it highlights how complex the whole power dynamic was in the Byzantine Empire. Even when they were pushed aside, they still held influence over the people. And when Zoe decided to marry Constantine, Theodora ruled alongside them.
So you had two sisters and a husband, all sharing power. That's a pretty unusual situation, wouldn't you say? Did that even work?
The source describes it as this really interesting dynamic. Zoe, with her understanding of politics, and Theodora, with her cautious nature, seemed to balance each other out quite well.
A true power couple.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I guess in this case, a power trio. But this arrangement couldn't last forever, could it?
Sadly not. Zoe died in 1050, which left Theodora to rule on her own for 6 years, until she died too.
So after all those years of sharing power, Theodora finally got to rule alone. What kind of empress was she?
The source describes her as a very capable administrator, someone who could dispense justice, issue decrees, that sort of thing, manage the affairs of the empire with a strong hand. But it also hints that she might have been a little insecure, maybe relied on her advisors a bit too much.
It makes you wonder if, after all that time in her sister's shadow, she ever really believed in herself. Maybe things would have been different if she had had more confidence in her own judgment.
It's a good point. It really shows the challenges that women in positions of power often face, that pressure to prove themselves, the doubts from people who don't think they deserve to be there.
And that whole balancing act of being strong, but also meeting society's expectations.
Exactly. But there was another big event that happened during Theodora's reign, one that had a huge impact on history.
You mean the Great Schism of 1054?
That's the one. The final split between the Roman Catholic Church in the West and the Eastern Orthodox Church in the East.
What a pivotal moment. It completely changed the religious and political landscape of Europe and beyond. It's wild to think that Zoe and Theodora were alive to see all this happen.
It makes you realize just how important this period was. They weren't just dealing with palace gossip. They were living through huge historical changes.
So what happened to the Byzantine Empire after Theodora died?
Well, Theodora didn't have any heirs of her own, so she chose a successor from outside the Macedonian dynasty, which, as the source points out, brought a lot of instability to the empire.
So their deaths were like the end of an era.
In a way, yes. And Theodora's choice of successor, while probably necessary, really upset the balance of power. It created this void that different groups within the empire were ready to exploit.
It makes you think about the ripple effects of leadership decisions.
It really does.
Yeah, it really is fascinating to think about how those decisions play out over time. So before we wrap up this deep dive into the lives of Zoe and Theodora, is there anything else from the source material that really stood out to you?
Well, there's one thing. It's not explicitly stated in the source, but it's something that I've been thinking about a lot.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Do you think it's possible that just by being empresses, by being women who defied societal norms, that Zoe and Theodora might have actually contributed to the decline of the empire?
Wow, that's a pretty bold statement. Are you saying that their rule somehow weakened the Byzantine Empire?
Not exactly, but think about it. Their reigns. They really challenged the whole patriarchal system of Byzantium. They showed everyone that women could hold power, make important decisions, even lead armies.
Which would have been incredibly radical for that time period.
Right, and it must have been incredibly disruptive to a society that was so deeply rooted in the belief that women should be subservient to men.
So their very presence on the throne
Uh-huh.
was a threat to the established order.
Exactly, and it's possible that their success actually emboldened those factions within the empire who were already looking for ways to undermine the dynasty.
So it's like their very success led to their downfall.
It's a strange paradox, isn't it? It shows us that progress isn't always linear. Sometimes even the greatest achievements can have these unintended consequences.
It makes you wonder, what if they'd been born in a different time? A time that was more accepting of women in leadership roles?
Absolutely. Imagine what they could have accomplished if their talents and intelligence had been truly embraced, nurtured even, instead of constantly questioned.
But even with all the challenges they faced, they left an incredible mark on history. It's really inspiring to see how they navigated those complexities and carved out their own paths to power.
Definitely. Their story reminds us that even within these seemingly rigid power structures, individuals can still make a difference, challenge the status quo.
Zoe and Theodora, they might not have been perfect rulers, but they were definitely unforgettable. And their story, it's full of drama, intrigue, and tragedy, ultimately. But it still resonates with us, even centuries later.
It really does. For listeners who want to learn more about Zoe and Theodora, and the Byzantine Empire in general, there are so many resources available. A quick search online will give you tons of information.
And I'd also recommend the book Theodora, Empress of Byzantium. It's by Stella Duffy. It's a fictionalized account, but it really captures the spirit of Theodora and the tumultuous era in which she lived.
It's always interesting to see these different interpretations of historical figures, especially women like Zoe and Theodora, whose lives were often shrouded in mystery.
As we wrap up our deep dive today, I'm left with a sense of awe and a deeper appreciation for just how complex Byzantine history really is. Zoe and Theodora's story reminds us that the past isn't really past, is it? It's still with us. It echoes in the present, and it offers us these glimpses into the enduring challenges and triumphs of the human spirit.
And it leaves us with a final thought, too. A question to ponder. What if women like Zoe and Theodora had been given the full opportunity to use their talents, their leadership skills, without the limitations imposed by society? It makes you think about how far we've come and how much further we still have to go to achieve true equality.
That's a powerful question to leave us with. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through time. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the fascinating stories that history has to offer.